Good morning, friends. As the sun begins to rise and the streets are still quiet, let's take this slow moment together. Maybe you're sipping on coffee, or maybe you're just lying back under the covers with your headphones in. Notice how your breath falls into rhythm with the hum of the morning, steady, simple, alive. Here's the uncomfortable truth: you might not survive if you keep believing that sacrifice and love always come back to you. Sometimes you can pour out your years, your savings, your soul, and still be told you're not wanted. So before you ease into this story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now set down whatever weight you've been carrying, maybe let a fan hum in the background, and let's begin this morning's journey. It was my 80th birthday, the kind of milestone you think surely someone will notice. I'd set the table with my best china, baked a cake with too much frosting, and placed candles in a neat row like little soldiers waiting for orders. The clock ticked, 6 o'clock, 7, 8. No one came. I called my son Daniel, my voice rehearsed in its cheerfulness. Are you on your way? On the other end, his wife Vanessa laughed, not kindly, not nervously, just sharp. We're in Cabo Margaret, a vacation. You'll have to celebrate by yourself. Maybe tidy up that old house of yours, it'll give you something to do. The line went dead before I could answer. I stared at the cake, the wax starting to melt onto frosting that no one would eat. My hands trembled not from age, but from something heavier. Anger, grief, humiliation, all braided together. Odd fact of the day: in ancient Greece, forgetting someone's birthday was considered a grave social insult equal to questioning their place in the community. Apparently, my family had no ties left to cut. I blew out the candles alone, the smoke curling like a ghost of what should have been. And in that silence, something inside me shifted. If they could abandon me on the day I entered this world, then maybe it was time I stopped arranging my life around theirs. The morning after my birthday, the house was too quiet. Even the refrigerator seemed embarrassed to hum. I cut myself a sliver of last night's cake and took one bite. It tasted like sugar and disappointment. I wrapped the rest in foil and slid it into the freezer, a tiny archaeological exhibit for a future me to excavate and shake her head at. I made coffee, the strong, sensible kind, and took my mug to the dining room. Sunlight fell across the table, catching the faint smears of melted candle wax I hadn't scrubbed away. Funny how wax clings to china the way old stories cling to us. You can scrape and rinse, but the outline remains. I pulled a yellow legal pad from the drawer and drew 3 columns: what I gave, what I received, what I want. I'd used this format all my life for groceries, for school office supplies, for budgets that never quite balanced. Today, it felt like a rescue raft. Under what I gave, my pen moved with a kind of angry grace. Mortgage help, bailouts after surprise credit card bills, new tires, braces, camp fees, back-to-school clothes that looked curiously like designer labels, babysitting that turned into overnight care, that turned into, we'll pick them up Sunday if we're not too tired. I paused, shook my hand, and added my holidays, my sleep, my pride. What I received came slower. A few photos where I was out of focus. Thank yous that sounded like IOUs with amnesia. And last night's parting gift: we're in Cabo, tidy up your house. That line deserved its own bullet point, underlined twice. I stared at the 3rd column. What I want. My hand trembled, not from age, but from habit. Wanting had always felt like a luxury item I couldn't afford. Finally, I wrote peace. Friends who keep their promises, mornings that belong to me, a home that isn't a revolving door for other people's emergencies. I just set the pen down when something buzzed faintly in the living room. Not my phone that was silent on purpose, but a heavier, clunkier sound. I followed it to the couch and found Daniel's old tablet wedged beneath a cushion, still logged in, blinking with life like a fish washed ashore. I shouldn't have looked. I did. Yes, I know. But if fate slides a file folder into your lap, you at least peek at the tabs. There they were. Photos from Cabo. Vanessa with a drink taller than her forearm. Daniel grinning behind mirrored sunglasses. The twins, Ethan and Noah, buried to their necks in sand, while a caption proclaimed, "Hard work pays off." Another album titled Grind Season featured shopping bags that had never seen a clearance rack. A reel bragged about self-made discipline edited, I assume, on the plane I quietly paid for by covering their overdraft fees last spring. My stomach knotted, not with jealousy, but with insult. My work had paid off for them. My second job during the recession. My car I kept 15 years so Daniel wouldn't have to drive a clunker. My garden I turned into a side hustle of flower arrangements to fund those emergencies. Odd fact of the day, researchers found the world's oldest complaint letter on a clay tablet from ancient Mesopotamia, somebody furious about poor quality copper. 3,000 years later, I was a grandmother, angry about poor quality gratitude. Human nature ages, but it doesn't retire. I scrolled through messages. Vanessa had a group chat labeled Village, where the village mostly cheered her boundaries. One message made me laugh out loud, a short, sharp sound. If Margaret really loved the boys, she wouldn't make everything about money. Money, the quiet pipeline from my account to their lifestyle, apparently transformed into selfishness the moment it stopped flowing. I set the tablet down and took 3 slow breaths, counting. Like the physical therapist taught me, 4 in, 6 out. When you've lived 8 decades, you collect little survival techniques like seashells. Another floated up now named the thing plainly. Not misunderstanding. Not family differences. Exploitation. If you can name the beast, you can decide whether to feed it. From the window, I could see my birch tree shaking light into the room. I used to love this house most in the mornings, the ritual of sweeping the porch, the first clink of cups, when the twins visited, the way Daniel would wander in and steal the crispiest piece of bacon because Mom can't taste the difference. I felt that memory like a bruise you press just to prove it's still there. An academic phrase drifted into my mind, relic of a community college course I took for fun, intergenerational reciprocity. Fancy way to say parents give children grow, and one day children give back in respect, time, and care. We'd never made it to the reciprocity part. We were stuck in extraction. I gathered last night's plates and marched them to the sink. The cake domed in the freezer like a snowbank. The dining room waited stubborn with silence. I needed proof that I existed outside other people's wants. So I opened the pantry and took out a box labeled Party Supplies, the stash I kept for birthdays and school events. I hauled it to the table and began sorting napkins, tea lights, a banner that said, "Congrats" in glitter. I would be vacuuming up at my funeral. Half went into a donation box, the other half into the trash. I kept one roll of ribbon I actually liked, let the rest go. Here's a truth whispered in the voice of age: you don't have to keep the tools other people handed you to build a life you never wanted. When I finished, I made lunch, 2 slices of toast with butter and a fried egg that behaved itself for one's victory. I ate at the table and allowed myself 3 jokes in my head, because humor is my spinal cord now. If martyrdom burned calories, I'd be an athlete by now. The tablet's grind season reel should come with a disclaimer, supported by Grandma LLC. I have given out more sandwiches than a roadside diner and received fewer tips. I washed my plate and stared at the legal pad again. A new line formed in what I want. A decision only I can make. The decision hovered like a bird that hadn't chosen a branch. Sell the house. The thought arrived whole, unblinking. Not to punish them, though God knows the shock might puncture a fantasy or two, but because this house had become a stage set where I performed the role of helpful matriarch until the curtain never fell. I wanted a smaller place with windows I could clean in an afternoon and a lock that clicked like a period at the end of a sentence. Odd fact, second course in medieval towns, ringing the evening bell signaled curfew from the French couvre-feu, cover the fire. A ritual to protect the community and mark the day's end. I needed my own curfew on chaos, cover the fire, end the day where my life burned to keep everyone else warm. I called a realtor. Her name was Denise, and she said what seasoned women often say when they know a storm survivor. When they hear one, I can come by this afternoon, Margaret. We made a plan. After we hung up, I took the tablet back to the couch. For a second, I considered leaving it visible, an invitation to confession. Instead, I turned it off, slid it into a padded mailer, and addressed it to Daniel's office with a neat note, "You left this behind." Sometimes the quiet line cuts deepest. I cleaned the wax from the good china set, each plate back in its place, and ran my fingers along the cabinet edge, smooth as a closing chapter. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked at a passing jogger. The day had brightened without asking my permission. That felt like a blessing. Before Denise arrived, I took the legal pad to the porch where the birch tree shook dimes of light onto the steps. I added one more line to what I want a future that doesn't require amnesia. I want to remember this empty chair and this cooling coffee and still choose toward joy. Inside, the doorbell rang. I smoothed my sweater and told the house thank you, the way you do when you're leaving a gracious host. Then I went to let my future in. Denise showed up with a folder tucked under her arm and a smile sharp enough to slice through hesitation. "Mrs. Rowe," she said, shaking my hand firmly, "80 is the new 60, and 60 is the new 40. Let's talk strategy." I liked her immediately. Realtors have a sixth sense for whether you're selling out of panic or out of resolve. Denise looked at me for about 5 seconds before nodding, as if she knew I wasn't the kind of woman who'd waffle. We walked through each room together. She admired the crown molding the hardwood floors, the little nook where I'd read bedtime stories to Ethan and Noah. "This place will go fast," she said, making notes, "especially with the market right now." I trailed behind her, touching walls, brushing the banister, letting the house say its goodbyes. It wasn't sorrowful, it was ceremonial, a closing ritual. Closing. Odd fact of the day, in some indigenous cultures, moving homes meant performing a blessing ceremony, thanking the dwelling for shelter before stepping out. I wasn't burning sage, but my fingertips tracing wallpaper felt like my own version. That afternoon, Denise listed the house. By evening, 3 offers had landed in her inbox. Cash buyers, investors. People eager to turn my sacrifices into their equity. I chose the family who wanted to live here, not just flip it. Call me sentimental, but the house deserved laughter in its walls, not spreadsheets. 2 weeks later, I signed the closing documents. The pen glided smoothly, no hesitation. When the notary stamped the final page, I felt lighter than I'd felt in decades. Not sad, not regretful lighter, as though I'd been carrying a secret trunk on my back and finally set it down. Vanessa, of course, had no idea. She was still posting from Cabo, still spinning narratives about her earned luxury. But the wheel was about to stop turning in her favor. When the Rows returned from vacation, bags dragging, tans fading, they would discover the locks had changed the driveway full and the house no longer theirs to assume. I almost wished I could see their faces. Almost. Odd fact number 2. In chess, there's a move called sukswang. when every possible move you make makes your position worse. Selling the house was my zugzwang for them. No matter how they reacted, the outcome had already shifted. I poured myself a glass of wine that night, raised it to the quiet walls, and whispered, "Thank you." Because sometimes leaving is the kindest way you can stay alive. They came back on a Thursday evening, the sun already low enough to cast long shadows across the driveway. I happened to be sitting on the porch of my new apartment 2 streets over, sipping chamomile tea, when Denise texted me. They've arrived. I pictured it vividly. Daniel dragging the suitcases, Vanessa scrolling her phone, the twins bickering about who got the last pack of gummy worms. I imagined their key scraping against a lock that no longer recognized them. The pause, the confusion, the rising pitch of Vanessa's voice. "What do you mean the lock doesn't work?" An hour later, my phone rang. Daniel's number. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, another buzz, this time a text in all caps. "Mom, what did you do?" I set the phone face down. Not every call requires an answer. By the next morning, they were at my door. I opened it because dignity means facing storms without hiding. Daniel's face was red, eyes wide. Vanessa's lips were pinched so tight they could cut paper. "You sold the house," Daniel demanded. "I did," I said, calm as still water. "You can't just throw us out," Vanessa snapped, arms crossed. "Correction. I said I didn't throw you out. I sold a house that was legally mine after funding your lifestyle for a decade. The new owners simply don't have a line item in their budget for freeloaders." Odd fact of the day. The word freeloader first appeared in print in 1937 during the Depression when too many mouths leaned on too few wallets. My wallet had been theirs for years and now it was closed. Daniel rubbed his temples. "We have nowhere to go. The boys..." I cut him off gently. "The boys will survive. Children adapt. What they need more than a big house is parents who don't confuse entitlement with love." Vanessa's eyes flashed. "We could sue. This is elder abuse by you against us." I almost laughed. "You're welcome to try. But the paperwork trail is clean. My lawyer has it all." Their silence stretched brittle as glass. "Mom," Daniel finally whispered, "why didn't you just tell us you were unhappy?" "Because every time I hinted at it, you reminded me I was family. Until I stopped paying. Then suddenly I wasn't." They left with no more words, just the sound of tires squealing down the street. That evening, I wrote in my notebook, "Sometimes peace begins with a slammed door you didn't have to shut yourself." The fallout spread faster than wildfire. Within days, Vanessa was on social media, her favorite battlefield. A photo of the twins looking forlorn on a couch that clearly wasn't theirs appeared with the caption, "Pray for us." My husband's mother sold our home out from under us. We're left with nothing. The comment section lit up. Some people clutched their pearls and cried injustice. Others whispered the truth, neighbors who'd seen me mowing their lawn, paying for pizza deliveries, babysitting, while Vanessa posted poolside selfies. By the third day, the narrative had already begun to crack. Odd fact of the day, the word scandal comes from the Greek skandalon, meaning a stumbling block. Vanessa thought she was setting one in front of me. Turns out she tripped on it herself. I didn't need to defend myself. Silence became my loudest rebuttal. Meanwhile, reality pressed in on them. With no steady income beyond Daniel's job, which, let's be honest, barely covered groceries, they scrambled. They begged relatives. They floated at friends' houses. The twins, Ethan and Noah, showed up at school tired, clothes wrinkled, stories thin. Helen, my neighbor from the old street, dropped by with banana bread. "They're unraveling," she said bluntly. Vanessa even tried telling people you had dementia, that you didn't know what you were signing. But Denise set them straight. She told everyone you were the sharpest client she's ever had. I laughed a deep belly laugh that surprised me. For years, laughter had been rationed like sugar during wartime. Now it poured out of me freely. That night, Daniel called again. His voice was thin, almost frayed. "Mom? I don't know what to do. Vanessa's furious. She says you've destroyed us." I leaned back in my chair, the fan humming behind me. "No, Daniel. I stopped destroying myself. The rest is up to you." When I hung up, I felt the oddest thing. Not guilt, not anger. Relief. Like someone had finally lifted a quilt of expectation off my chest. Weeks passed, and the rose drifted like tumbleweeds, never rooted, always restless. Word spread that Vanessa had moved in with her sister 2 towns over, leaving Daniel and the twins in a cramped rental. My mailbox blessedly stayed free of their drama. Then came the knock. A woman in a navy skirt suit, clipboard in hand. "Mrs. Rowe. I'm with Child Services. We received an anonymous call regarding your grandson's welfare." I invited her in, poured tea, answered every question calmly. Yes, I loved Ethan and Noah. Yes, I wanted the best for them. But no, I wasn't their bank or their babysitter anymore. She nodded, scribbled notes, and when she left, I knew exactly who had placed that call. Vanessa was playing her last card, paint me the villain, so she could keep her halo. Odd fact of the day in poker, there's a move called a bluff catch. When you call someone's bet, not because you have a strong hand, but because you know they're lying. This was my bluff catch. I called Stephen Harris my attorney. He sighed. Classic tactic. "But your record is clean, Margaret. All those documents you've kept, they're gold. If she pushes this, we'll push back harder." That night, I pulled out my cedar box again, the one with old keepsakes. Buried under photos, I found a letter from my late husband, Thomas. His handwriting still steady, his words like a hand on my shoulder. "Don't spend your years as everyone else's safety net. You deserve a life of your own." I pressed the paper to my chest. Tears came, but they weren't bitter. They were cleansing like rain washing dust from a window. I copied one line into my notebook, "Live freely, Margaret," then underlined it twice. For the first time, I believed I could. The letter from Thomas lingered in my mind like a melody you can't shake. I carried it with me to the community center the following week, where I'd started attending a Wednesday afternoon circle. Women like me, mostly widows or grandmothers, each with stories that rhymed in painful ways. There was Margaret with another last name whose son had drained her retirement. Alice, who'd co-signed loans until her credit score sank. Gloria, who was raising her granddaughter alone because her own daughter disappeared into addiction. We weren't victims, we were veterans. Survivors of battles nobody wrote songs about. I read Thomas's line aloud to them, "Live freely, Margaret." For a moment the room went still, then Gloria nodded. That's what I needed to hear today. Odd fact of the day, sunflowers don't just turn toward the sun. On cloudy days, they turn toward each other, sharing whatever light they can find. That was us in that circle turning toward each other. Meanwhile, Vanessa's smear campaign online had begun to wilt. People remembered who'd really been paying for years. Neighbors who saw me mowing lawns or cooking extra meals for the boys spoke up. The halo slipped from her head, and she hated it. Daniel, on the other hand, looked thinner when I saw him outside the grocery store. He shuffled toward me, avoiding eye contact. "Mom, the boys miss you. Could you at least have dinner with them?" I agreed on one condition. "Dinner with them, Daniel, not with you and Vanessa." He swallowed, nodded. The twins came over that Saturday, collapsing into my arms, smelling of grass and cheap laundry soap. We ate spaghetti-told jokes, played Uno until someone accused me of cheating, which I absolutely did. Their laughter filled the apartment like incense. When they left, I wrote in my notebook, "Family can be chosen even within your own bloodline." And I began to wonder if Thomas's words weren't just encouragement. Maybe they were a roadmap. Summer deepened, and with it came the kind of heat that makes you reconsider every life choice, including owning an oven. I kept the blinds half-drawn, fan humming, and tried to paint, yes, paint. I hadn't picked up a brush since high school art class, but Helen convinced me at the community center's Creativity for Seniors workshop. You can't mess up a canvas, she'd said. Worst case, you just call it abstract. So I painted. Not well, but honestly, swirls of blue that looked like seasick waves. Splashes of red that accidentally resembled spaghetti sauce. Yet each stroke felt like reclamation. This was my wall now, not theirs. Meanwhile, Vanessa tried a new tactic, pity. I got a text from an unknown number, clearly her style. The boys don't understand why their grandma abandoned them. Couldn't you have waited until after they finished school to ruin their lives? I deleted it without reply. Abandonment is when you stop loving someone. I hadn't stopped loving my grandsons. I'd only stopped funding bad decisions. Odd fact of the day, the term gaslight comes from a 1938 play where a man tricks his wife into thinking she's losing her mind by dimming the gas lamps and denying it. Every time Vanessa twisted the narrative, I remembered, don't doubt your own eyes. One afternoon, I found Daniel waiting outside my apartment. His shoulders slumped, eyes hollow. "Mom, she's gone," he said simply. "Vanessa moved in with her sister. Says she's done." I let him in. He sank into my couch like a man twice his age. "I can't believe she left." I poured him a glass of water and said, "Sometimes the best gift someone gives you is leaving." He gave a tired laugh, the kind you exhale when you recognize truth, even if it stings. That night, I pulled Thomas's letter from my cedar box and read it again. Live freely. For the first time, it didn't sound like an impossible dream. It sounded like the next logical step. By the time autumn crept in, the chaos had settled into something quieter, though not yet calm. Daniel and the boys had moved into a modest rental, 2 bedrooms, peeling linoleum, a yard barely big enough for a barbecue. When I visited, I noticed the fridge was covered, not in vacation magnets, but in the boys' drawings. Crayon rockets, stick figure superheroes, one lopsided cat. For the first time in years, their life looked real, not staged for Vanessa's camera. Daniel sat across from me at the kitchen table, thinner than before, but steadier. He ran a hand over his face. "Mom, I didn't realize how much I leaned on you until it was gone. I thought you'd always be there. Like a safety net I didn't have to think about." I sipped my tea. That's the problem with safety nets. People forget they're not supposed to live in them, only fall into them once in a while. Odd fact of the day, the original safety nets weren't for acrobats. They were used on ships strung along the sides to catch sailors who slipped. They saved lives, but no sailor expected to walk the whole voyage in one. Daniel's eyes dropped to the table. "I've been a fool. Vanessa convinced me you were manipulating us, and I believed her because it was easier than admitting I was failing." I let the silence do some work before I spoke. "I'm not interested in blame anymore. I'm interested in boundaries. If you want me in your life, it won't be as your ATM. It will be as your mother, nothing more, nothing less." He nodded slowly. "I want that." The twins came barreling in, then Ethan proudly waving a math test with a big red A, Noah, carrying a book about space. They piled onto me laughing, asking if I'd make spaghetti again soon. And in that messy little kitchen, I felt something shift. It wasn't reconciliation yet, but it was the blueprint of one. The weeks that followed were an experiment in repair, not nostalgia. Daniel called twice a week, not to ask for money, not to dump problems in my lap, but to talk. About the boys, about his work, about whether he should finally learn how to cook something beyond scrambled eggs. I teased him that scrambled eggs were already advanced cuisine in his bachelor phase. One Saturday, I invited them all over. The twins helped me stir sauce in the kitchen, splattering red on my apron until it looked like I'd fought a tomato war. Daniel set the table badly, forks in the wrong place, cups upside down, but he tried. That was the point. Over dinner, he cleared his throat. Mom, I want to say this clearly. I'm sorry. For letting it go on so long, for not protecting you from Vanessa's words, for assuming you'd always carry us. I watched his face, lined by regret, but softened by sincerity. I accept your apology, Daniel. But we're not rewinding. We're not going back to the way things were. He nodded. So how do we go forward? Respect. Transparency. No more secrets. And absolutely no more financial rescues. If you stumble, I'll listen. But I won't pay. That's the deal. Odd fact of the day. In architecture, the keystone is the stone at the top of an arch, the one that holds everything in balance. Without it, the whole structure collapses. For years, I thought money was the keystone of our family. Turns out the real keystone is honesty. Daniel raised his glass of water, then to honesty. To honesty, I echoed. The twins clinked their milk glasses against ours and giggled. That night after they left, I wrote in my notebook, repair, not rewind. We're building a new arch stone by stone. And for the first time, the idea of family didn't feel like a weight. It felt like possibility. By winter, my life had begun to take on a rhythm I hadn't known in years. Mornings started with painting in my little studio nook afternoons, with tea and chatter at the community center evenings, sometimes with the twins sprawled on my floor doing homework. My apartment was smaller than the house I left behind, but every corner was mine. No unspoken debts, no silent expectations. At the community circle, we laughed about things our children would never understand. Alice confessed she once hid her car keys to keep her daughter from borrowing it, then forgot where she hid them. Gloria shared how she learned TikTok dances from her granddaughter, pulling a muscle in the process. I told them how Ethan accused me of cheating at Uno again, and he was probably right. Odd fact of the day, did you know? Elephants revisit the bones of their dead, gently touching them with their trunks. Scientists think it's their way of remembering. Our circle was like that, women returning to the bones of old pain, not to grieve forever, but to honor what was lost and move forward. Daniel kept showing up too, but in smaller, healthier ways. He brought over a loaf of bread he'd actually baked himself, dense as a brick, but edible with enough butter. He called me after a long shift just to say goodnight. He even asked the twins to thank me properly when I helped them with a science project. It was awkward, but it was new, and it mattered. I began planning a trip to Italy with Helen. Tuscany, Florence, Venice. We circled names on the map, like schoolgirls daydreaming. For once, the dream wasn't tethered to anyone else's needs. It was mine. That night, as snow fell softly outside, I wrote in my notebook, joy is ordinary too. And ordinary joy is enough. The new year arrived with crisp mornings and a clarity I hadn't felt in decades. My roses didn't live here anymore, but on my balcony, a pot of winter pansies bloomed stubbornly against the frost. I liked them even more. They didn't pretend to be delicate. Daniel came by one Sunday afternoon, the boys trailing behind with their backpacks. They tumbled into my apartment, already asking for snacks, already arguing over whose turn it was on the tablet. Daniel stood awkwardly in the doorway until I waved him in. "Mom," he said, settling into the chair across from me. "I don't expect us to ever go back to what we were, but I'd like to keep moving forward, if you'll let me." I studied his face, worn but honest. Forward, yes, but only with boundaries. Respect truth and no rescues. I won't be your safety net anymore. He nodded. I understand. And for the first time, I believed he did. Odd fact of the day, butterflies retain memories from when they were caterpillars. Transformation doesn't erase the past, it carries it forward, reshaped with wings. That was us now. Not forgetting, but flying differently. Vanessa never came back, at least not into our story. I heard through whispers she was chasing new ventures in another city, I didn't hate her. I didn't even wish her ill. Some chapters closed themselves. Meanwhile, my life was full in quieter, steadier ways. Community gatherings, painting sessions, plans with Helen for Italy. The boys' laughter filling my apartment, messy and unpolished, but real. Evenings with tea windows glowing warm against the cold. As twilight deepened one evening, I wrote my final line in the old yellow legal pad. Peace is not the absence of noise, but the presence of choice. I closed the notebook, looked out over the city lights, and whispered, "This is mine." And for the first time, I felt not just free, but whole. At 80, Margaret Rowe expects her family to celebrate her milestone birthday. Instead, her son Daniel and daughter-in-law Vanessa vacation in Cabo, leaving her alone with a melting cake. When Margaret discovers Daniel's old tablet, she learns the truth. For years, she has funded their lavish lifestyle through secret mortgage payments and endless support, all while being treated as disposable. Determined to reclaim her life, Margaret sells the family home while they're away. When they return, they find the locks changed and the property gone. Shock turns to fury. Vanessa accuses her of manipulation. Daniel flounders in denial, but Margaret stands firm, naming the truth. She will no longer be their safety net. Vanessa retaliates with social media smears and even a call to child services, but Margaret's careful documentation and her lawyer protect her. She leans on a community circle of women with similar stories, and she finds strength in an old letter from her late husband, urging her to live freely. As Vanessa eventually leaves, Daniel struggles with reality. He apologizes, admitting how deeply he relied on her. Margaret accepts, but with clear boundaries: no money, no secrets, only respect. Their relationship begins anew, modest but healthier, while the twins' visits bring warmth to Margaret's life. Meanwhile, Margaret creates a life of her own, painting friendships, planning a long dreamed-of trip to Italy. She discovers that joy doesn't need to be grand. It can be ordinary, steady enough. The story closes with Margaret fully embracing her independence and peace. She's not erasing her past, but carrying it forward with new strength and choice. What once was obligation has transformed into freedom, and for the first time in decades, she feels not only free, but whole.